Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, heading into the 2024 season, specifically in the Big 12, you make no mistake about it. This Kansas State program is certainly a title contender. I think you went as far as taking Kansas State to win the Big 12 championship. I got a text from my brother. I think it was 12:30 at night the other night, and you texted me, Kansas State's winning the Big 12, so you're going to get the opportunity to sell us all on this Kansas State team heading into 2024. Going to dive into the depth chart, what they have coming back, what they have coming in, talk about what the schedule looks like for Kansas State. Fired up to get into it. Before we do it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And these season previews are always the best for us to do. One, we love doing it, but more importantly, we get to learn so much from you guys in the comment section. Can't thank you guys enough. One, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. But if you have that dark horse, that player that we are leaving out, throw it in the comments section. Again, we learn a ton from you guys. And Dill, without further ado, I'll give you the T-box here. Let's start on the offense for Kansas State. Avery Johnson era taken off in Manhattan, Kansas. How are we feeling about this Kansas State offense?
I mean, that's where it starts. I mean, you kind of think Kansas State really hasn't had that guy that really gets you excited in a really, really long time, arguably going back to the Colin Klein era. And even I don't know that he quite has the talent that Avery Johnson has, especially as it pertains to being able to throw the ball. So I think you kind of look, when you're at Kansas State, and I think you've been close in a lot of years to being in not just really, really good Big 12 team, but being something like an elite team, being something like a possible dark horse contender. You need that guy to elevate you at the quarterback spot. I think right now they have that. And again, it's still Kansas State. Kansas State, just everywhere else around that position, always develops really well, keeps guys in their program, builds them up. So that's what I'm looking for. If Avery Johnson plays something that, like, not a Heisman level necessarily, but plays kind of close to that level, this is a team that can go really, really
The thing is, like, I'm not ruling out Avery Johnson to get into the Heisman conversation. I mean, this is a kid that can push the ball down the field. He can obviously make it happen with his legs as well. I think he's the most talented Kansas State quarterback we've seen in Manhattan since we've been alive. Now, he obviously is only going into his second year. He's got to put it together in 2024, but from a pure talent standpoint, I don't think there's been a more talented signal caller for this Kansas State program.
And he'll have his fair share of help, frankly, with his weapons. I mean, you kind of look, a couple of really interesting running backs led by DJ Giddens, and then you have the X factor that is Dylan Edwards and his ability to make plays and kind of be a bit of a dynamic weapon and possibly in that kind of run scheme that Kansas State likes to run, which is very complicated, does a good job getting guys to the boundary. So, again, you pair up a guy like Giddens, who's a really, really solid all-purpose back, keeps that team on schedule, with a guy like Dylan Edwards who can make plays, and you pair that up with Avery Johnson, who in his own right obviously can make them. That should be a really, really explosive run game. And then the wide receivers, I think, can play too. So I think you're loaded with the weaponry. I think, again, you got the quarterback. It'll be interesting to see how they kind of manage the offense.
When Dylan Edwards committed to Kansas State, we hopped on, talked about it, and a lot of the Kansas State fans in the comment section were like, we need two running back sets, Avery Johnson, DJ Giddens, Dylan Edwards, all in the same backfield that you can cook in terms of how you want this rushing attack to look. And I think one of the conversations we have to have, obviously, Colin Klein going to Texas A&M, I'll say this, like, I'm a massive fan of Matt Wells. I think everywhere he's been, he's done a phenomenal job. I don't think he got a really kind of fair shake at Texas Tech. I think Kansas State went out and got an elite offensive coordinator, an elite offensive mind to kind of help develop Avery Johnson and develop an offense that kind of suits Avery Johnson. Now, you go to the wide receiver room and say, all right, you lose Ben Sinnott, who was, I mean, that passing attack largely went through Ben Sinnott a majority of the time. I'm kind of high on this wide receiver room. I think the most interesting player to talk about is Dante Cephas, who was really good at Kent State for the last couple of years. He goes to Penn State. That Penn State offense in general just stunk. And so I'm not going to hold it against Dante Cephas for not necessarily having a phenomenal year. He comes to Kansas State. One of the things we're talking about, at least I have in my notes, is that you want to see Kansas State be a little bit more explosive. They were top 10 in points per game, averaging 36.5 points, but I mean, they were only 46 in yards per play. This is an efficient offense, but you start talking about, those small margins where Kansas State can take that step. I think being a little bit more explosive in the passing attack is certainly that step. Now, you have a quarterback that I think is a much better passer of the football than Will Howard. And I also think that you have wide receivers that can win vertically downfield. You look at Jace Brown, you look at Dante Cephas. Jace Brown averaged almost 17 yards per catch. Dante Cephas' career has averaged almost 15 yards per catch. I think this Kansas State offense has the potential to kind of stay as efficient as we're used to seeing Kansas State, but maybe sprinkle in a little bit more explosiveness, which, again, is kind of where I look at this Kansas State program and say that's where they can take that step in the right direction in the 2024 season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Jace Brown's the guy I'm looking for in terms of that athleticism, that ability to create when he gets the ball in his hands. But also, I think, frankly, you talk explosiveness. I think DJ Giddens loved what he does as a running back, but I do think you miss a little bit with Deuce Vaughn. I mean, how explosive he was, you might be able to catch a bit of that with Dylan Edwards.
Yes.
I'm not saying either of these guys is better than Deuce Vaughn, because Deuce Vaughn is one of the better running backs that have really come through the Big 12, frankly, in a while. But I think these two together pair up a little bit more interestingly, where, again, Dylan Edwards does give you that home run threat. Again, you kind of look, Jace Brown is a guy only playing as a true freshman, and you don't frankly see that a ton from Kansas State players. I think he's a guy who can give you a little bit of something, and same with Dante Cephas. So I think I think the weaponry in terms of explosiveness is a little bit better. I think the one big question, frankly, is you're right. Ben Sinnott was such a huge part of that offense. I think you kind of look for who's that guy who is just going to be your dependable, like, kind of down.
Agreed. And to I just want to circle back to Jace Brown, who, again, as a true freshman early in the season, didn't get a ton of burn. You go to the last 4 or 5 games for Kansas State, like, Jace Brown started to be a dude. We don't normally talk about elite wide receivers at Kansas State. That offense has kind of gone through the running backs and tight ends. I think they might have one with Jace Brown. Now, you go to the offensive line. Obviously, you lose a guy like Cooper Beebe, who is one of the better offensive linemen we've seen in college football in quite a long time. Dill, I look at this offensive line and say this is exactly how Coach Klieman wants it. You look at redshirt senior, redshirt. I mean, it's all guys that have been within this program for 4 to 5 years. You bring in Easton Kitty from North Dakota. It's maybe a little bit of an unknown because you are replacing a few guys. I think I'm pretty dang sure that Kansas State's offensive line is going to be just fine in the Big 12 in 2024.
Yeah, and that's one of those things, like, similar to argument like us Michigan fans make. It's like, well, yeah, we lost a bunch of really good offensive linemen, but that's what Michigan's been doing. That's frankly what Kansas State's been doing, just the way they developed that position. And I think you're right. They don't lose guys to the portal. They've kept these guys in the program for a really, really long time. Panzer Hadley, I think, or Hadley Panzer, I should say, being able to anchor that unit. I thought he had a great year last year. So, again, I don't really know why you would necessarily question what their offensive line is going to be, aside from the fact you haven't seen them. But they're all super experienced guys who've been in the program, and this has been about as good of an offensive line development group as you've seen.
Now, going over to the defensive side of the football, it was a solid defense in 2023, like we're used to seeing from Kansas State. But one thing that kind of jumped out at me as I went back and watched a few games, as I looked at kind of the overarching numbers from this Kansas State team, they weren't very good against the run. Gave up 5.1 yards per carry. That was 116th in the country. Look at the secondary. I know. I guess I'll just let you cook on the secondary because I like it. I know you certainly like it. Let's talk about the secondary and then go to the question mark, and that probably is, for me at least, that Kansas State front seven.
Yeah, and this is a group that's kind of been together for a long time. So, again, you talk about that continuity, being able to build on itself, and you frankly have a handful of pros in the way I don't think you always see at Kansas State. I think Jacob Parrish, been playing there since he was a true freshman. I think he has a big bounce back here. I thought last year, I don't think he took the step I was almost thinking, given what I see from Kansas State players. I mean, he was good, but it's like I was almost expecting like an all-conference kind of player. I don't know that you quite got that level as the shutdown corner. VJ Payne is one of my favorite safeties in the country. I mean, to be that long, that athletic, cover that much ground, make plays on the ball, just very, very complete in that sense. And then you look at Siegel and Garber, both two guys who are coming back, have played a ton of football. Siegel, great in that slot, and Garber, a really good complement to it. Jacob Parrish is. It's a loaded secondary. It's a secondary that's played together for a really long time. And that, to me, when you kind of get those factors coming together, you can be really
and we talk about it all the time. Continuity is becoming a larger conversation than we're used to having. Like, gone are the days where you just develop guys for 3 to 4 years. The transfer portal is active. you don't see Kansas State get too active in the transfer portal like other programs. And that's going to benefit when you're talking about offensive line units or secondary units where continuity is really important. Comment on VJ Payne, Dale, you're a ball knower. I mean, you put VJ Payne as the number one player on this Kansas State team. The Kansas State Wildcat fans in the comment section absolutely loved it. You get into the front seven. It's a very experienced group. Like, this is a lot of guys that have been within this program for 4 to 5 years. That's probably my biggest question mark, especially when you look at the landscape of the Big 12, where you look at Devin Neal at Kansas or Taj Brooks at Texas Tech, UCF with the running backs they have. The Big 12 has some elite rushing attacks heading into the 2024 season. My biggest question mark for Kansas State is how good can they be against the run? Can they take a step from what they were in 2023? Because if they do, this defense is checking a ton of boxes heading into 2024.
You still got Uso there again. I think when you have a good nose guard at Kansas State, that's really, really crucial because you see they like to play kind of leaner on the other side or on their two defensive end, let's call them. I think, again, you have that guy. You have a great set of linebackers. That's what I'm kind of looking for. And you have your natural questions of who's going to step into that defensive end role. I thought Cleve Duke, in terms of what he was doing for them, was really important, especially kind of being that one pass rush guy that you really felt good about winning. But I think you're loaded at the linebacker spot. You obviously have Austin Moore back, who seems like he's been there forever, really, really productive. You have some young guys like Jake Clifton, who I'm really interested to see. I thought he looked great against Texas. And then you got Desmond Purcell. So I think you have a lot of guys you feel really, really good about in the linebacker room. I'm kind of looking if they can get some of these guys in that edge room to step up. And I'm looking at Toby Osen. I'm not sure I can get that name right now. But I thought like some of the flashes you saw from him, good ability to rush the passer, good ability to make some plays. He's one of the guys I'm looking for. Because, again, you have a lot of like your kind of traditional Kansas State guys. Brendan Mott, really good player. Uso, really good player. Can Toby be that guy to really take it up a notch and be kind of a playmaker more so than some of the other guys?
Now, you go to the Kansas State schedule, and I'll say this. I like how it shakes out. And you know why. You look at the schedule and say, all right, the three hardest teams I think you have in the Big 12, Arizona, Oklahoma State, Kansas. You get every single one of those games at home. And I think that's crucial with this Kansas State team. They are very good at home. You kind of dig into it. UT Martin should be a win. You go on the road to Tulane. I think that's where we get a strong understanding of how good this Kansas State team is, because Tulane's a very good football program. If you can win that football game, go 2-0 heading into Arizona where you get them at home, they'll kind of briefly getting into that matchup. We'll obviously preview that when week 3 comes around. Friday night in Manhattan, Kansas, I look at Kansas State to kind of dominate the line of scrimmage against Arizona. And I kind of like the matchup where you look at Arizona, where are their strengths? They're going to be throwing the football all around the yard with Noah Fafita and T-Back. I think Kansas State has the secondary to maybe not fully neutralize, because that is a very hard quarterback wide receiver duo to neutralize, but you kind of feel good about how that secondary matches up against Arizona. You get BYU on the road. That should be a win. I'm not very high on BYU. Then you get Oklahoma State at home again before the bye week. And again, you talk about playing Oklahoma State. You don't want to play them in Stillwater. You get to play them in Manhattan, Kansas. I think there's a really good chance that this Kansas State team starts 5-0 heading into the bye week early October.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the Arizona game, and only for the reason, frankly, that Arizona I don't think is going to give teams a ton of wiggle room, if you will, on the offensive side of the ball. I think, again, you can't make mistakes, and obviously Avery Johnson, you're kind of ushering in a whole new system for him. Probably not going to be a whole new system, but you obviously are going to have some new faces, some changes. I just think with Arizona, again, you can't be a mistake team. And again, with Avery Johnson, some of the youth they have on the offensive side, that maybe can get a little bit hairy. But I think, again, when you look at the completeness of the Kansas State team, I don't really think there's a team I'm looking at in the Big 12, aside from maybe Utah, who I'd really say, like, oh, that's a really well-rounded team that I think will play in the big
and
three.
You don't play Utah. And so you look at Utah, Kansas State, I think we both feel like there's probably a crash course collision between Kansas State and Utah, kind of working through the schedule on the road at Colorado. Again, similar to how we just talked about with Arizona, I think you can run the football. So maybe some of the question marks about a new young quarterback, the easiest way to get a young quarterback some confidence is to give him a run game. And I think this Kansas State run game can be dang good. You go on the road to West Virginia, that's certainly a tricky one. I think West Virginia is another team that's going to run the football. Kansas at home. You go on the road to Houston. Again, I think all 4 winnable games, and you finish out taking a look at Arizona State at home, Cincinnati at home. Then you go on the road to Jack Trice Stadium at Iowa State, which will be a tricky one. You kind of talk about this Kansas State team and say, find me the loss. I think this Kansas State team might be favored in every single game that they play in the 2024 season, kind of setting up that crash course collision against this Utah program. A lot of reasons to be behind this Kansas State team. We'll cut it there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.